Have you ever heard of a king who was known more for his kindness than for his battles? A king whose crown seemed to rest on a gentle head, not a fearsome one? This is the story of such a man. His name was Edward. People came to call him Edward the Confessor. He was a king of England a very, very long time ago, long before the tales of knights in shining armor you might imagine. His story isn't filled with loud clashes of swords or shouts of victory on a battlefield. Instead, it is a quiet story, a gentle story, full of soft moments and a deep, abiding faith. We will walk through his life, step by step, following a clear timeline from his birth to his lasting legacy. We begin our journey over 1,000 years ago, around the year 1003. This was a time very different from our own. There were no cars, no bright city lights. News travelled only as fast as a horse could run or a ship could sail. England was a land of green fields, thick forests. Edward was born in a small town in England called Islip, not far from the city of Oxford. He was a prince. His father was the king, a man named Ethelred, often called the Unready. His mother was Emma from Normandy. Being born a prince might sound like a wonderful fairy tale, but for young Edward, his childhood was filled with more fear than fun. The world outside his royal home was not a safe or peaceful place. England at that time was under constant threat. From across the North Sea came fierce warriors in longships, the Vikings. They sailed up rivers to raid towns and farms. For a child like Edward, this meant hearing stories of battles and seeing the worried faces of the grown-ups around him. He would have seen soldiers marching and heard the distant sound of alarm bells ringing. It was because of this great danger that a huge change came to Edward's life. When he was about 10, Sweyn Forkbeard invaded England, forcing Edward's family to flee. They had to leave their home, their country, and everything they knew. They crossed the choppy English Channel to Normandy, his mother's homeland. The journey ended his childhood in England and began a long, quiet exile, an exile that would shape him profoundly. Normandy was a world away from the turmoil of England. It was a land of rolling green hills, quiet monasteries, and orderly farms. Here, across the sea, young Edward found a different kind of life. He was safe with his mother's family, under the protection of the Duke of Normandy. For nearly 30 years, this peaceful land would be his home. During his long years in exile, Edward spent much of his time learning and praying. He was drawn to the life of the church. He learned that strength could be found not just in a sword, but in faith and stillness. He found comfort in the stories of the saints and in the quiet moments of private prayer. He made a vow, a solemn promise to God, that if he were ever to return safely to England, he would make a pilgrimage to Rome to thank God at the tomb of St. Peter. Even in the peace of Normandy, Edward was still a prince in exile. He followed the news from England with a heavy heart. He did not raise an army or plot a violent return. Many people in England did not forget him. They hoped the gentle son of King Ethelred would return. The powerful nobles, the bishops of England, looked across the sea. They invited him back not as a refugee, but as their king. In the year 1042, after almost 3 decades away, Edward sailed back to the land of his birth. The people welcomed him, hoping this quiet man could finally bring stability, peace. The day of his coronation was a grand and joyful occasion. It took place in the great cathedral at Winchester on Easter Sunday. Sunshine streamed through the high windows as the crown of England was placed upon his head. He was not a proven warrior like the kings before him. He was a man of prayer with gentle eyes and a soft voice. He did not promise great conquests or bloody victories. Instead, he promised to rule justly and to uphold the laws of the land. He preferred talking and negotiation rather than fighting, and he gathered wise counselors around him. He believed a kingdom could be strong through fairness and good laws, not just through military might. This gentle style of rule made him beloved by the common people. They had suffered heavy taxes to pay for armies. Edward lowered these taxes. He wanted his people to prosper and live without fear, building up his kingdom from within. Stories were told of how he would listen personally to the problems of ordinary people. He would not turn away a farmer with a grievance or a widow seeking justice. He believed that a king's duty was to be a shepherd to his people, guiding and protecting them with a gentle hand. He attended Mass daily, spent long hours in prayer, and gave generously to churches and monasteries in England and in Normandy. He had vowed to go to Rome, but his advisors warned it was too dangerous. He wrote to the Pope, who released him from his vow. In its place, the Pope instructed him to help the poor and to build a magnificent church in honor of St. Peter. He turned a personal disappointment into a public blessing. With the Pope's blessing, Edward set his heart on a truly grand project. He chose a spot on marshy land, just up the River Thames from the City of London, where a small monastery to St. Peter already stood. Edward would rebuild it on a magnificent scale. Westminster. Masons came from Normandy to build in the new Romanesque style. Soaring arches and strong pillars, then new to England. Edward poured in his own money and encouraged his nobles to give. He visited often, watching the walls rise, a testament in stone to his faith. He envisioned a royal church where kings would be crowned and buried, the spiritual heart of the nation, beside a new royal palace. As the years passed, the church took shape. A long nave, a rounded eastern apse, and two imposing towers at the front. People marveled at its size and beauty, so different from the smaller wooden churches they knew. For Edward, seeing his dream become reality brought deep joy and peace. As people watched their gentle king, they began to see more than just a good man. Stories, like quiet whispers, began to spread throughout the kingdom, of simple wonders and small miracles. A crippled man dreamed that if he reached the king, he would be healed. His friends brought him, and Edward helped him to his feet. Miraculously, he could walk. Another tale speaks of a blind woman whose sight was restored after washing her eyes with the water the king had used. One Easter, he was seen to smile at Mass. He later told of a vision of the 7 sleepers of Ephesus, a sign of future troubles. Another story tells of Edward appearing to a pilgrim far away, giving him a ring to carry back to England. Whether these tales happened exactly as told, they show how deeply his people loved and revered him. As Edward grew older, his thoughts turned more and more to God and to the future of his kingdom. He and his wife, Queen Edith, had no children. There was no son to inherit his crown. By the end of 1065, Westminster Abbey was ready, but Edward was too ill to attend its consecration. On December 28th, the abbey was consecrated in a beautiful service. Though absent, the king's spirit filled the great church. In early 1066, knowing his end was near, he commended his wife to his councillors and named Harold Godwinson as successor, hoping to prevent civil war. Then he closed his eyes and passed away peacefully. His body was laid to rest before the high altar of his newly finished Westminster Abbey. The entire kingdom mourned the passing of their gentle king. After Edward's death, the peace he had kept was shattered. The year 1066 saw invasions and the Great Battle of Hastings. Yet the memory of the gentle king grew stronger, and pilgrims sought comfort and healing at his tomb. About a century later, in 1161, the Pope declared him a saint, Saint Edward the Confessor. The church he built has stood at the centre of English history for nearly 1,000 years. Coronations, royal weddings, royal and national burials, and daily worship. Visited by millions and rich in memory, Westminster Abbey began with the quiet, prayerful dream of one gentle king. But his greatest legacy is not stone. It is the idea that a leader can be both strong and gentle, powerful and kind. In a world that often celebrates loudness and aggression, St. Edward's life quietly reminds us that of humility. Please like, comment and share. Thank you for watching.